Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Have you ever been traumatized? That's a big word. You may not even realize it. There is such a thing as trauma with a little t, continuous trauma, developmental trauma. Dr. Randall Bell has told us in his book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, the art, science, and stories of resilience, that the majority of people have been traumatized at some time in their life. So I am very, very, very happy to introduce to you Dr. Randall Bell.
Dr. Duffy, it's sure nice to see you.
Wow, and I get to see you on Zoom. Yay, nobody else sees us, but we see each other.
Yeah.
So Dr. Randall Bell, post-traumatic thriving. I love the expression. When I first heard it years ago, I said, yowie, that's it. Post-traumatic thriving, not post-traumatic stress. And of course, we know, of course, there's stress involving trauma. So let me just say that not only are you the author of Post-Traumatic Thriving, you are a sociologist and an economist, and you have done work on trauma all around the world, including 9/11 and Sandy Hook and many, many, many sites for a very long time. And you yourself, Dr. Bell, had very early childhood trauma when you were 11 years old, having had open heart surgery. That is amazing. I can't imagine. I had it myself 4 months ago, which I have to tell you, and many people, many of my listeners know. But it's incredible. It's grueling, and I can imagine for a child, 11 years old, who doesn't even have concepts of life and death yet, for the most part. How on earth you dealt with that?
Well, yeah, Dr. Duffy, I dealt with it by making all the classical mistakes and having absolutely, this stuff is not taught in school. So I made the error of not talking about it, of stuffing it down, which is never a successful strategy for dealing with trauma. The doctors patted me on the back and said, "Go have a great life, kid. We've fixed you." But
we fixed you.
Yeah, but on the emotional side, I was born with this. I grew up with it. I had the open heart surgery, and when you deal with a trauma in that way, it's going to come back and bite you, and it did. I think that's really why I wrote the book.
And you had open heart surgery more recently as an adult. Yeah. So from one fellow survivor to another. It's excruciating on every level, opening one's body and going into one's heart on every level. And so you had this desire to help people with trauma. And so please tell us, you have so much wisdom to impart.
Well, the thing is that I started writing the book, and I wasn't even thinking about the heart surgery. I wrote the book from more my career side because I had this unique access to all the, well, I don't want to say all, but many of the major cases that we hear about as headline on the news, the World Trade Center and Flight 93 crash site and Hurricane Katrina and O.J. Simpson and all these cases I worked on, and hundreds of others. And so I just thought, well, because I have this unique access to these people behind the statistics, something kind of connected me with that topic of post-traumatic thriving and identifying that certain people came out better than others through the trauma and really studying why that was. And then full circle, I realized that I hadn't dealt with my own trauma, and I had to go back. Honestly, Dr. Duffy, I had to go back and rephrase the whole book from, you need to do this, you need to do that, to we need to do this, we need to do that.
Oh, my word.
I realized I was in the same boat as everyone else.
Oh, my word, Dr. Bell. Rephrase the whole book from you to we. Oh, that so touches me. Wow. So we have as you say, the internal trauma, things happen to us, our physiology, and then we have all these circumstantial things that we have to deal with. So the people who thrive, who actually learn to thrive after trauma, I'm certainly not there yet, I have to share. I'm aware that I'm dealing with some depression. Mm-hmm. And even though I had open heart surgery 13 years ago also, mm-hmm. and I was very depressed for a good year. And I vowed this time, I'm so much wiser, I'm not going to have depression. Mm-hmm. And there it is. It's like there. Mm-hmm. So, and this is natural. And you use, of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's dealing with trauma, with terminal illness originally, and death, endings, tragedies. So do you want to just explain a little bit about that?
Well, sure. You mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She has the 5 stages of grief, and she lands on acceptance. But before that, she lands on depression. And you touched on it a second ago, that's part of the process. It's very, very normal. And I think, what you just kind of modeled is just ideal reaction of just acknowledging it rather than trying to stuff it down or pretend it's not there, because, who wants to admit that they're, are going through depression? Completely normal. In fact, it'd be odd not to have depression. The rule of thumb is from the science is that if you are depressed for 3, 4, 5 months, totally normal. But if it goes longer than that, you got to really kind of reach out for some help, whether it be through more talk therapy or a therapist, ideally a licensed therapist, but at a minimum, journaling, a good friend you can talk to it. But the key is you can't bottle it up inside. But depression's, entirely normal. But then what I did is I took the 5 stages of grief. I actually start with shock, which isn't in the 5 stages, because understanding that physiology is really healing in and of itself. And then I end up with the literature that came from post-traumatic growth from Dr. Calhoun and Dr. Tahosky, it's close to there's a Dr. Tahosky in my office, but close enough. And they have the literature on post-traumatic growth. And then I bridged the two, going from dive, survive to thrive. And then you have all 15 steps to go from the initial shock to ultimately healing from the whole thing. That's the framework of the book.
And that famous river in Egypt, right? Denial. Mm. And I agree with you. I think Elizabeth Kubler-Ross contributed so much to the world. So to normalize these phases of grief. And so you talk about dive, survive, thrive. And can you avoid diving? You can't really avoid diving, can you? Well, diving for any length of time. That's the thing. There's the initial plummeting, the initial shock, whatever the loss is. It's all about loss, right, Dr. Bell? All about loss. Yeah,
it's all about losing something, and you can't circumvent dive. I tried, I just described it, and I'm not alone. Most people try and avoid that whole process and dodge it, and that always manifests in some kind of self-medication, whether it be alcoholism, drug addiction, workaholism, any host of things, anything to distract us from the real problem. The way you heal is face it, as unpleasant it is. You face it. You face the denial. You face the anger. You face the depression. Then you can heal. Then you can move to survive, get back on your feet, and then if you're really one of those lucky folks where the trauma really wakes you up, you can actually go into a thrive mode where you do something far better than you would have, except for the trauma. So in a way, in a weird kind of way, we kind of have to thank ourselves for having gone through the trauma, because we're doing something, really remarkable.
Wow. Thank ourselves for having gone through it and to get to that thriving stage. So when I said to you, Dr. Randall Bell, or our audience, that it's so common, trauma is so much more common than people even realize. Can you speak about that?
Sure. Well, the statistics are there's a lot of literature in the book, and one of the points of literature, I forget the source, but it's in the book. By college age, 66 to 85% of humans have been through at least one trauma. And as you know, I'm sure, Dr. Duffy, trauma can be layered. You can have more. There's no rule that says you only get one at a time. You can have multiple layers of trauma, but by college age, everybody has it. By my age, everybody's had a trauma. Loss of a parent, loss of a child, death. I call it the difficult Ds: death, divorce, disease, destruction, disaster, deconstruction. There's a whole host of things that can go wrong and will go wrong statistically with everyone.
Wow. And you also talk about current trauma, Dr. Bell, that how on earth can you heal from trauma if you're still in it?
Yeah.
And many people don't even realize they're in it. That may have become their norm. I mean, obviously, when you're in war, you're in it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're right. I kicked the book off by saying if you're currently in a trauma, an abusive relationship, or any kind of trauma, you first have to get to a healthy place before you can, talk about healing. So if the blood is still gushing out, we gotta stop the bleeding. We gotta stop the bleeding. Yeah.
And you also talk about safety. Number one is safety, a feeling of safety. I myself, not to make it drawing it too much to me, the idea of safety, I think there's something called an existential threat. I have such a different view of mortality now. Mm-hmm. And so you include spirituality in your book, and you talk about a higher power in whatever frame, if you want to look at it as divine love or God or nature or whatever it is, some connection to a sense of a power much bigger and higher than us.
Right. Yeah. Chapter 11 is all about faith. And you're absolutely right. I, of course, respect people to define that for however that works for them. But it's essential. I want to say, I think a better way of saying it is statistically, your odds are linked or correlate to healing with a recognition of something larger than ourselves. If it's all just about ourselves, it's harder to really kind of heal from this stuff. But whether it be humanity or God or faith or religion or spirituality, the key thing isn't so much the semantics, it's that we look beyond and look to something bigger than ourselves. And that in and of itself has a very therapeutic value that reconciles with recovery.
And I know for me, the idea of meaning and purpose, that I just have so much more living to do, and I have so much healing to do of people, it's that expression, hurt people, you use it in your book. Mm-hmm. But I love how you added healing people heals people, healing people, heal people.
Yeah, I think I remember better than me. It's kind of a long book,
Yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day, said 400 pages. Oh my gosh. The thing is though, that with trauma and healing, you have to kind of marinate in this stuff. It's not kind of a one and done kind of thing. And that's why I kind of let people marinate in each of the 15 processes, whether you're dealing with anger or depression, or you're into the experimental mode or awareness and mindfulness. You have to kind of marinate that and let that kind of soak through, our mind, body, and soul before you move on to the next step. So, I have lots of phrases there, but then I kind of add to it to kind of let people kind of absorb the whole meaning of that particular step. Then you get genuine healing.
Yes, yes. I love that term, marinade. Of course, I'm a foodie, so. But marinade, beautiful. So tell us about the steps.
Well, sure. The first one is shock. And let's start with the very beginning, because the physiology is really important. In fact, I think I do. I got a brain.
Oh.
Here's my little visual aid. So a lot of people don't realize this, but we're actually born with 3 brains, not just one. The center brain, right at the base of the skull, that's the reptilian brain. That's the instinctual brain. And that's all pure instinct. No, not a lot of emotion, not a lot of logic. In fact, little or none. But that's the reptilian brain. The midbrain is more the emotional brain. That's called the mammal brain. That's where you feel emotion. But the outer brain is what makes us uniquely human. So right now, Dr. Duffy, as we're talking, we're probably using our outer logical human brain because we're not being shot at. We're not, dealing with some imminent danger. And that's where humans spend most of their time is with the human brain. But when trauma occurs, the outer human brain just turns off like a light switch. The brain's very electrical. And what turns on is the reptilian brain, which really is the base of fight, flight, or freeze. That's nature's way of getting us to a safe place. So in other words, it's the bunny and the lion. And does the bunny decide to run, to stand and fight, or to freeze and hope the tiger doesn't see it? That's all takes care of the reptilian brain. So the problem with trauma is when this happens, all our memories reside in the reptilian brain where we can't really process it. And that's why you hear about the veterans that when they hear a car backfire, they hit the deck when they come home, because that's an instinct and they're triggered. And that's another key word of trauma is recognizing your triggers. So the whole key of trauma, where I'm going with all of this little science demonstration, is to take the memories that are buried in our reptilian brain and process them and put them back into the human brain where we can logically work through them and not be traumatized and triggered any longer. That's really our goal. And understanding that science, understanding what's going on with shock, first of all, lets us know that it's completely normal. And number 2, gives us a little bit of insight what we're going to deal with when we heal trauma.
And as a psychotherapist myself, I knew this base, what you're describing, and I talked about it right away. I talked about it. I cried whenever I could. I let myself cry. It really does help to have that sense of connection with others who would care, as well as with self. So and we live in what I call a feeling-phobic society. Feeling-phobic. We're afraid of feelings. We suspect feelings. In the original traditional religions, it's a matter of better not feel anything because feeling causes us to do things. So better not feel it so we don't act it out. And then, of course, if you even have thoughts, you're a sinner. It's very, very, very tough to be healthy with a lot of these unhealthy beliefs, would you say?
Yeah, well said. Yeah, feeling-phobic. I hadn't heard that term before. I might have to put in the...
I made it up, Dr. Randall Bell.
That's brilliant. I like it. Yeah, you got to feel to heal, like you said before. And you're right. We do try to stuff those feelings down because, let's face it, who wants to cry, particularly men, but nobody wants to go there. But the problem is, the ironic aspect of it is you have to in order to move on.
You have to go there to move on. And there's an expression in the 12-step movement. We can look at the past, but we don't have to stare at it.
Oh, that's another one. I got to write this down.
Yeah. Don't dwell. But, I love your expression, sit in the fire. Oh, my goodness. I haven't heard that before.
Well, I actually learned that from the inmates at San Quentin Prison.
Wow.
Long story short, I was on a plane and a guy sat down next to me. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and he was a volunteer up at San Quentin Prison. And I was so riveted to him talking about the whole flight that he can kind of sense that. I think he invited me to go into prison and with him, and I did. And the very first time I ever meditated was actually in prison, holding hands with two convicted murderers on either side of me. No kidding. And they're the ones that taught me about sitting in the fire and talking about it. And here are these guys that are just, huge. They could break me in half, talking about sitting in the fire, sharing their emotions and meditating. My whole head was exploded because they were so kind and so nice. They had transformed so completely and genuinely. And sitting in the fire was their expression for, finding that trusted person and talking about that ugly stuff, which a lot of people are trying to bury.
That ugly stuff. So, Dr. Bell, you use many real people in your book.
Yeah.
You give us case studies and you give them in little short snippets and throughout the book, showing the growth of these individuals. So, and you have such a gamut. If I may, I just read a few because so people can relate. That a devoted wife and mother discovers her husband, who died of suicide, led a double life. Leo lost an eye and his hearing in two separate accidents. 17-year-old person was convicted of murder. Gifted athlete was dashed of his dreams of Olympic glory. So Susan lost her luxury home from a landslide. John was living in an idyllic island life when his daughter was killed by nuclear fallout. Erica was a young Hungarian girl whose life was brutalized by the Nazis. Tanya's sister was horrifically murdered. On and on, on and on. And such a gamut. And I love how you quote the Buddha that life is suffering, but he was only half right? Life is suffering and life is also joyful. So, what do we plug into?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm fortunate. I have a diverse set of friends, and all the people you just mentioned are friends of mine. Debbie, I went to high school with her. I knew her husband. He committed suicide. She had no idea that he was living a double life with drugs and alcohol and hookers. And every one of these people really bring these principles alive. I mean, it's one thing to go through the clinical books and all the theory of it, but it's another thing to see it in play with people and are willing to sit down and share their stories with you, as these folks did. And so what I try and do is I try and bring the academia and the science out, but I try to bring it alive with the people's stories at the end of each chapter as they're going through that phase and what it looked like for them. So that's, I think, what gives a more holistic, element to the whole book, because it's more than just stories and anecdotes, and it's more than just science. It's the combination. When you add those, 1 + 1 = 3, at least in my view.
In your view, Dr. Randall Bell, and I just want everyone to know, again, I am interviewing Dr. Randall Bell, Bell, the author of Post-Traumatic Thriving, that after trauma, you can not only survive, you can thrive. The art, science, and stories of resilience. And your visual, your picture on the cover is instead of an arrow that goes straight up in healing, but it goes up, and then it has a lot of knotty gnarls, and then you get out of it. And I think that's something that people also need to understand, that even with the best of intentions and the most intelligence and the best help, we still have the ups and downs in our recovery from trauma.
Yeah, we sure do. And the phrase I use repeatedly through the book is rinse and repeat, because you can get to some of the advanced stages like experimentation or faith or gratitude or forgiveness, and then you revisit the anger the next day. So it's not a linear line. It is messy, but as we practice these concepts, we visit the ugly stages less frequently. That's the goal. But it does come up. You're never. Like I say, it's rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat. Yes, yes. I want everyone to know I have very, very good news that Dr. Randall Bell is coming back to us next week, that this is a 2-part series. So what we have to close part 1 right now, Dr. Bell. So is there any one thing that you want to leave people with until next week?
Thanks, Dr. Duffy. Yeah, it's just basically, the key takeaway here is the dynamic duo, the sit in the fire and grounding. We haven't talked about that. Maybe we can talk about it more next time, but that's whether you call it meditation, deep breathing, Lamaze, but deep breathing has a real powerful effect. So deep breathing exercises, which we'll call grounding, and sitting in the fire, finding that person to talk to. I hope those are the 2 principles I really hope people will take with them, because that leads to genuine healing in and of themselves. So it's just those 2 things.
I use that term grounding a lot with my clients, and I'm trained in various modalities, Gestalt, which is mind and body, and the idea of really feeling your own body on the planet, on Mother Earth, and being aware. And again, in the 12-step movement, we say, put your head where your feet are. So I love the term grounding, and I love how you associated it with meditating. I hadn't put those 2 together in that way. And so meditating is a kind of a mystery to a lot of people. And the concept of grounding, most of us are not fully embodied. We are not living in our bodies. We're taught as adults to live from our neck up, and once in a while visiting our genitals, and that's about it. But to be fully embodied. So we do have to close for now. So thank you so much, Dr. Randall Bell, and your book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, The Art, Science, and Stories of Resilience. I'm so glad I get to interview you next week for everyone. Everyone tune in, please. This is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.